The flight attendant's finger, manicured and accusatory, pointed at my chest. "Sir!" Her voice was a blade of ice. "You're in the wrong seat." I held up my boarding pass, the digital screen clearly displaying 2A. Before I could speak, a voice cut in from the aisle. A white woman, clutching a purse like a shield. "No, that's my seat. He needs to move." The attendants didn't even glance at her ticket. Their eyes were locked on me, the black man in the VIP cabin who didn't belong. I was the problem to be solved. I took a slow breath, the unfairness settling in my bones like a familiar cold. They saw my skin, not my success. They saw an inconvenience, not the CEO of the company that powered the very entertainment system they relied on. I smiled, a small, private thing. They were about to learn the cost of their assumptions. The silence in the cabin became a tangible thing, heavy and judgmental. I could feel the gaze of other passengers, a mixture of curiosity and uncomfortable pity. The woman, Brenda, according to her ticket, let out a performative sigh of exasperation. "This is why I always print my pass," she announced to no one and everyone. The lead attendant, Chloe, placed a placating hand on Brenda's arm. "We're so sorry for this confusion, ma'am." The word confusion was a knife. There was no confusion. My ticket was valid. The only confusion was in their minds, a biased inability to reconcile my appearance with this space. Ben, the other attendant, shifted his weight nervously, his eyes darting between me and his superior, waiting for the order to remove the disruption. I closed my eyes for a second, not in defeat, but in focus. This was the moment where paths diverged. I could make a scene, demand a supervisor, and fulfill their stereotype of the angry black man. Or I could let them have this small, hollow victory, secure in the knowledge that the real authority in this situation had not yet spoken. I opened my eyes, my decision made. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I see," I said, my voice so calm it seemed to absorb all the sound in the cabin. "I'll move." The relief on their faces was instantaneous, a silent celebration of a restored, unjust order. But as I reached for my briefcase, my hand brushed against my phone in my pocket. The real power wasn't in the seat. It was in my pocket, and it was about to wake up. My name is Marcus King. To the world, I was the founder and CEO of AuraTech, a company I had built from a dorm room idea into a billion-dollar empire that quietly powered the digital infrastructure of entire industries. But in the confined, rarefied air of the first-class cabin, I was simply a problem. I was on my way to deliver a keynote that would shift paradigms, to speak to a room of thousands who hung on my every word about the future. This flight wasn't just travel. It was a moving piece of my office, a crucial bubble of silence and space I had paid a premium for to review my notes and mentally prepare. But the sanctity of that space was violated the moment I stepped across the threshold. The atmosphere was a palpable force. The warm, automated greetings the flight attendants offered to the white passengers in business class. "Lovely to see you again, Mr. Henderson," cooled into a brittle professional formality when they reached me. A brief, tight-lipped nod. Their eyes, however, were more telling. They weren't hostile, just dismissive. They performed a quick visual calculus. My tailored suit versus my skin tone, my confident posture versus their ingrained prejudice. The assumption was clear as day. I was an accidental tourist in first class, perhaps an athlete or a musician, but surely not a titan of industry. I'd spent my entire life navigating these microcurrents of bias, the subtle tightening of a grip on a purse in an elevator, the second longer glance at a black credit card. You build a callus over your soul, layer by layer, but it never fully numbs the sting. The woman who claimed my seat, Brenda, was the embodiment of a privileged certainty I knew all too well. She didn't ask. She declared. Her voice carried the unshakable confidence of someone whose word had never been seriously questioned, whose place in the world had never been contested. The flight attendants, Chloe and Ben, seamlessly became her enforcers. They didn't need to confer. A silent understanding passed between them, creating a consensus of exclusion around me. They formed a united front against the perceived interloper. "We need you to move, sir," Chloe said, her smile a brittle facade of customer service. "We have a lovely seat further back." The word lovely was a particular kind of insult, a patronizing pacifier. They didn't verify her ticket. They didn't bother to scan mine a second time to be certain. The system, their system, had already decided. The truth was irrelevant in the face of their ingrained narrative. I felt the weight of the entire cabin's attention. A dozen pairs of eyes tracing my every movement. There was curiosity, of course, a flicker of pity from an older woman near the window, and from others, a quiet, unspoken judgment that sided with the authority figures. In that suspended moment, the sympathy I felt was less for my current self and more for the younger man I used to be, the one who would have flushed with hot, helpless anger, who would have protested and, in doing so, fulfilled the very stereotype they expected. That man would have seethed all the way to the back of the plane, his dignity in tatters. But that man was long gone, sanded down by 1,000 such moments, and forged into something harder. The hot anger didn't come. Instead, a cold, clarifying focus settled over me. This was not the battle. Making a stand here, in this aisle, was a tactical error. It was a skirmish I would lose on their terms. The real front line wasn't this carpeted aisle. It was digital, corporate, and far more powerful. As I picked up my briefcase, my fingers brushed against the cool, hard surface of my phone in my pocket. A deep, steadying breath filled my lungs. They had won the seat. They were about to lose everything else. The battle was about to begin on a different front, and I held the nuclear codes in my hand. I complied. I picked up my jacket and my briefcase and made the long, humiliating walk of shame to 34B. With every step, the ambiance shifted. From the hushed, lemony fresh air of first class to the cramped, recycled atmosphere of economy, my new throne was a middle seat, nestled between a man whose snoring already rattled the headrest and a young mother desperately trying to soothe a wailing infant. The humiliation was a live wire, sparking with every jostle from passengers stuffing bags into overhead bins. This wasn't a simple reassignment. It was a demotion, a physical manifestation of their bigotry. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw Brenda settle into my leather seat with a satisfied sigh, accepting a complimentary champagne flute from a smiling Chloe. The sight was a punch to the gut. It wasn't the chaotic fire of rage. It was a precise, calculating furnace. They hadn't just moved a passenger. They had invalidated my success, my purchase, my very presence based on the color of my skin. The injustice was a physical weight, a cold, dense stone in my chest. I stared at the stained fabric of the seat back in front of me, my mind not seething, but strategizing. They had chosen to see me as less than. Soon, they would have no choice but to see my power. I didn't make a scene. I calmly placed my briefcase under the seat in front of me, a tight fit that required force. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, but I wasn't listening to music. I opened a secure channel and called Lily, my chief of staff. My voice was low, steady, a stark contrast to the storm inside. Lily, it's Marcus. I'm on Sky-High Flight 214. I need you to record every detail of this. I have been forcibly removed from my paid first-class seat without cause, and relocated to a middle seat in economy. I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by the furious clacking of a keyboard. They did what? Marcus, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Be effective, I said, my tone leaving no room for emotion. Pull our master service agreement with Sky-High Airlines. I want a formal, immediate breach notification sent to their CEO and General Counsel. Cite Section 14.2, the Morality and Non-Discrimination Clause. Make it clear this constitutes a material breach. Consider it done. I'll have legal drafted within 10 minutes. And Lily, I added, my voice dropping even lower. In the preliminary notice, remind them, politely, that AuraTech's software runs their entire in-flight operational system, and that our security protocol allows us to remotely suspend service in the event of a material breach to protect our IP. One click, Lily. Make sure they understand that. I ended the call. The game was now in play. I was no longer just a passenger. I was a disgruntled counterparty holding all the leverage. The stone in my chest heated, the anger transforming into potential energy. About 20 minutes later, as the plane finished boarding and the cabin crew prepared for takeoff, Brenda, emboldened by her unchallenged win, decided to escalate. I saw her press the call button. When Ben arrived, she leaned forward, speaking in a stage whisper designed to carry to the surrounding rows. "Excuse me," she began, her voice laced with faux concern. "That man, the one who was bothering me earlier, he's been staring this way, quite intently. It's making me very uncomfortable." My blood ran cold, then instantly boiled. I had been looking straight ahead at the seat back, deep in thought. Her lie was so brazen, so maliciously crafted. She was weaponizing her perceived vulnerability, painting me as a threat, a predator. It was the oldest, most damaging trick in the book. Ben, the junior attendant, glanced back toward my seat. His eyes, which had been nervous before, now held a hardened glint of suspicion. He nodded sympathetically at Brenda. "Of course, ma'am. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. We'll certainly keep an eye on him. Please don't hesitate to press the button if you feel unsafe at any point." Unsafe. The word echoed in the silent cabin around her. A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, stealing glances at me. The audacity, the sheer fabrication, fanned the flames of my anger into something white-hot and razor-sharp. This was no longer just ignorance or implicit bias. This was a deliberate, malicious act of prejudice designed to permanently cast me as the villain. The calculated fire of my anger now had a clear target. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about my character, my safety, and my very right to exist in a space without being perceived as a threat. The battle lines were now drawn in blood. The white-hot anger crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. Brenda's lie had severed the last thread of my restraint. I would not just inconvenience them. I would demonstrate the absolute nature of my authority. The very infrastructure they took for granted was my domain. Opening the secure AuraTech admin app on my phone, I navigated past the user-friendly dashboard to the raw command line interface, the digital backbone of the aircraft. With 3 deliberate taps, I initiated a system-wide cascading reboot of all non-essential passenger-facing systems. It wasn't a malicious crash. It was a controlled, scheduled maintenance cycle, the kind that required a 24-hour notice they hadn't received. The effect was immediate and profound. First, the plane's Wi-Fi, which a man across the aisle was using for a video call, flickered and died. "Hey!" he exclaimed, tapping his screen in frustration. "I just lost the connection." A collective groan of disappointment rippled through the cabin as others discovered their dead links to the outside world. Before the complaints could fully form, the main cabin screens, which had been displaying the safety video and flight map, dissolved into a uniform, silent, cerulean blue. The entire cabin was plunged into a strange, quiet void. The only sounds the hum of the engines and the confused muttering of the passengers. A hush fell. This was more than an inconvenience. It was a rupture in the normal order of air travel. The confident, practiced atmosphere of the cabin evaporated. Up front, I saw Chloe and Ben spring into action, but their movements were frantic, unscripted. Ben tapped furiously at the touch-screen panel on the galley wall, his brow furrowed in confusion. Chloe picked up the interphone, her voice a hushed, urgent whisper I could barely hear. "Yes, we've lost everything. The panels are completely unresponsive. It's not just our unit, it's the whole cabin." The smooth facade of their control was cracking, revealing the panic beneath. At that moment, my phone vibrated softly in my hand. A single text from Lily lit up the screen. "Breach notice delivered. Their legal is panicking. The captain has been instructed to stand by for a call from corporate." Hold fast, Marcus. A sliver of hope, sharp and clean, cut through the lingering anger. It was working. The message had been received, not just in a corporate inbox, but here, in the metal tube where it all began. The pressure was being applied from the highest levels. My silent demonstration with the screens was a tangible echo of the legal earthquake shaking their headquarters. I watched as Brenda, deprived of her screen, fidgeted uncomfortably in my seat. She tried to get Ben's attention for another champagne, but he was too preoccupied with the systemic failure, waving her off distractedly. Her victorious smirk had been replaced by a petulant frown. The balance of power was tilting visibly and audibly. The passengers were growing restless, their annoyance now directed at the airline incompetence, not at me. The crew's authority, which had felt so absolute when they directed me to the back of the plane, was evaporating with every second the screens remained blue. They were no longer in control. I was. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The blue screens had cast an eerie, silent pall over the cabin for nearly 10 minutes. The initial annoyance of the passengers had curdled into a low-grade anxiety. This wasn't a normal glitch. The flight attendants had abandoned their cheerful pretenses, their faces etched with a confusion that bordered on fear. My sliver of hope grew, but it was a nervous hope, tethered to the agonizing crawl of time. What was happening behind the locked cockpit door? Then a heavy thunk echoed through the fuselage as the main cabin door was disengaged from the outside. All eyes swiveled forward as it swung open. The captain, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard and a grave expression that spoke of an interrupted flight plan, filled the doorway. He was followed by two men in the stark, dark suits of airport operations supervisors, their faces unreadable masks of authority. They didn't look at the passengers. They moved with a grim purpose, beelining for the front galley where Chloe and Ben stood frozen. The four of them formed a tight huddle, their voices a hushed, intense murmur that was swallowed by the ambient noise of the plane, but their body language screamed volumes. The captain spoke in low, sharp tones. I saw Chloe's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ben's shoulders slumped, his entire posture deflating as if the air had been let out of him. He ran a hand over his face, and when it came away, he looked pale and much younger. The suspense in the cabin became a physical thing, thick enough to taste, metallic and sharp like ozone before a storm. Every passenger was leaning into the aisle, straining to hear, to understand. Who were they here for? What had gone so wrong? Then the huddle broke. The entourage turned. For a heart-stopping second, I thought they would look down the aisle toward me. But their collective gaze passed over the curtain and landed squarely on Brenda. She had been preening, enjoying the drama, likely assuming it was all related to the technical issues. As the four figures approached her seat, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. The captain didn't mince words. His voice was firm, calibrated to carry in the silent, watching cabin. "Ma'am," he began, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We've reviewed the passenger manifest and the ground security footage from the jet bridge. You are occupying seat 2A, which you did not purchase. Your ticket is for 12C. A wave of quiet gasps rippled through the cabin, followed by the unmistakable, furtive sound of phone cameras being activated, screens glowing like fireflies in the dimmed light. Brenda's face morphed from smugness to sheer, unadulterated shock. "Excuse me?" she sputtered, her voice losing its cultured polish and climbing an octave. "There must be some mistake. I always sit here." "The only mistake was yours, ma'am," the captain replied, his voice cold and flat. "You will gather your belongings and deplane immediately. This flight cannot and will not depart with you on it." The spluttering outrage came next, a predictable torrent from someone whose privilege had always been a shield. "This is ridiculous. An outrage! Do you know who my husband is? He plays golf with your chairman." It was the cry of a system that had always protected her, now failing in real time. She pointed a trembling finger toward the back of the plane. "Why aren't you dealing with him? He's the one who was making threats and staring at me." The captain didn't even glance my way. His focus was entirely on her, a rock against her tempest. "My information does not concern any other passenger. It concerns you and your fraudulent occupation of a first-class seat. Now, you can gather your things willingly, or my colleagues here," he gestured to the two supervisors who took a deliberate step closer, "will assist you. The choice is yours." The suspense broke, but it didn't dissolve into relief. It transformed into a new electric tension. This was the moment of reckoning, but it was only the first. Brenda's removal was a stunning reversal, but Chloe and Ben were still standing there, pale and shaken. The focus was on her now, but the spotlight was about to swing. The real question hanging in the air was no longer about the woman in 2A. It was about the system that had enabled her. And that system was still standing in the galley, waiting for its judgment as a flustered, sputtering Brenda was escorted off the plane by the stone-faced supervisors. A collective, held breath seemed to release in a hushed wave. But the drama was far from over. The cabin door sealed shut with a definitive, pressurized hiss, closing on one act of the play and opening on another. All eyes, now wide with anticipation, swiveled from the empty doorway back to the front. The captain did not return to his cockpit. Instead, he turned his formidable presence toward the two remaining figures in the galley, Chloe and Ben. He stood in the center of the first-class cabin, making himself the focal point for every passenger. He was no longer just the pilot. He was the judge. And this was his courtroom at 30,000 feet. Still grounded in truth. "Chloe? Ben?" he began, his voice devoid of any professional warmth, each word crisp and clear, carrying to the very last row. The use of their real names, stripped of their titles, made them flinch. The decision to remove a paying, first-class passenger from his legally assigned seat, without a factual basis, and the subsequent filing of a false and unverified security report against him constitutes a gross violation of Sky High Airlines policy and, more importantly, federal anti-discrimination law. A sharp, audible gasp cut through the cabin. Federal law. The words landed with the weight of an anvil. This was no longer about a seating mix-up. It was a legal catastrophe. Chloe, the senior attendant, the one who had wielded her authority with such cold efficiency, completely broke. A strangled sob escaped her lips. We just thought," she stammered, her hands trembling as she gestured vaguely. There was a confusion, and she was so insistent. "You didn't think?" The captain interrupted, his voice cracking through her excuses like a whip. The steel in his tone silenced the entire cabin. You assumed his ticket was wrong. You assumed her word was more valid. You assumed the color of his skin dictated his place on this aircraft." He let the damning statement hang in the air, allowing its truth to sink into every listening ear. Your assumptions have cost this airline a 9-figure partnership with AuraTech. They have jeopardized our entire operational infrastructure, and they have stained a reputation built over decades. The excitement in the cabin was electric, a current of raw, vindicated energy. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed looks. Someone whispered, "Yes," under their breath. Phones were held higher, recording the historic, unscripted moment of corporate and moral justice. The captain's gaze was a physical weight on the two crumbling attendants. You were entrusted with the safety and comfort of everyone on this flight. Instead, you created an environment of hostility and discrimination. He finally looked at the two supervisors who had returned, standing by the door like sentinels. "Escort them off the aircraft. Your employment is suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation by corporate security and the FAA. It was a public execution of injustice. The abusers were being dethroned right before our eyes. Ben, who had been so quick to harden his expression at Brenda's lie, now looked like a scared boy, his face ashen. He opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. He simply nodded, defeated, and shuffled toward the door, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Chloe, however, was a wreck of tears and smeared makeup, her professional facade utterly obliterated. "My job," she wept. "I've been here 15 years. And in 15 years, you should have learned better, the captain replied, his tone final and utterly without pity. He watched as they were led away, the symbols of a corrupt micropower, now stripped of their uniform's authority and rendered pale, trembling, and jobless. The system wasn't just apologizing, it was publicly purging itself, cutting out the rot for all to see. The excitement was not born from schadenfreude, but from the profound, thrilling satisfaction of witnessing a wrong being set right with absolute, undeniable force. The balance had not just been restored, it had been reset on a foundation of accountability. A profound, ringing silence followed the departure of Chloe and Ben. The vacuum left by the dramatic purge was filled with a collective, breathless anticipation. The excitement was still there, a live wire, but it was now focused, waiting for its final destination. All the energy in the cabin, the recorded videos, the whispered conversations, the righteous indignation was now channeled toward the back of the plane. Toward me. The captain stood for a moment, his shoulders squaring as he absorbed the weight of the moment. Then he began to walk. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace down the center aisle. It was a walk of purpose, a pilgrimage of accountability. All eyes were on him, every head turning in unison as he passed, a wave of recognition flowing through the cabin. He was not just addressing a passenger. He was correcting a cosmic imbalance. He stopped at my row, his tall frame blocking the harsh fluorescent light from the galley. The snoring man beside me had woken up, blinking in confusion, and the young mother had managed to quiet her child, both of them staring. The captain's gaze was not on them. It was locked on me. "Mr. King?" he said, his voice markedly different from the one he'd used moments before. It was low, respectful, almost reverent. It was the tone one reserves for a dignitary, for a person of immense consequence. He did not shout, but in the cathedral-like hush of the cabin, every syllable was perfectly clear. On behalf of Sky High Airlines, and from myself personally, I offer my deepest, most sincere apologies for the profound disrespect and injustice you were subjected to on my aircraft. He paused, letting the formal apology settle. It wasn't a corporate PR statement. It was a personal atonement. "Your seat in first class is waiting for you," he continued, gesturing toward the front of the plane with an open hand, an invitation. A restoration. The entire crew responsible for this incident has been removed from duty and will face the full consequences of their actions. This kind of behavior is a stain on this uniform, and it will not be tolerated. This was it. The moment of justice. It wasn't just in the words. It was in the delivery. It was in the bowed head of a captain, the deferential tone, the public acknowledgement of my wronged status. The cold, hard stone of anger that had been sitting in my chest since I was forced to move finally dissolved, replaced by a warm, expansive sense of vindication. I unbuckled my seatbelt. The click echoed in the quiet. I stood. I did not look at the gawking faces. The phones still held aloft. I did not offer a triumphant smile or a nod of acknowledgement. I simply gathered my briefcase, my movements slow and deliberate, infused with a calm dignity that felt more powerful than any outburst of emotion. Then I began the walk. The same walk I had made earlier, but this time in reverse. This time I was not a pariah being exiled. I was a king returning to his throne. I felt the eyes on me, but the pity and judgment were gone, replaced by a new, potent mixture of awe, respect, and shared victory. I walked back to the front of the plane not as a chastened man, but as a victorious one. I had not fought with shouts, but with silence and strategy, and I had won. I arrived at Seat 2A, the seat I had paid for, the seat I had earned. I placed my briefcase in the overhead bin and slowly lowered myself into the plush leather. It was still warm from Brenda's brief, illegitimate occupation. The sensation was not unpleasant. It was a reminder of the transience of the wrong that had been so decisively evicted. The justice was tangible. I could feel it in the cool of the leather armrests, see it in the now active screen on the bulkhead ahead, smell it in the clean, unobstructed air. As I fastened my seatbelt, the cabin door was sealed with a firm, final thud. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. "Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff." The engines roared to life, a powerful symphony of forward motion. The plane began to taxi, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, we were moving toward our destination. The wrong had been righted, publicly, decisively, and completely. The justice was not just served. It was felt by every single soul on board, a lesson in dignity and consequence at 30,000 feet. The flight was profoundly serene. The moment the wheels left the tarmac, a collective exhalation seemed to fill the cabin, the tension of the last hour dissipating into the thin, high-altitude air. The Wi-Fi and entertainment systems hummed back to life, a silent testament to the restored order. The new replacement flight crew, briefed and undoubtedly shaken, moved with a hushed efficiency. They treated me with a deference that bordered on awe. "There, of course, Mr. King, and anything you need, sir." A stark contrast to the dismissive tones of their predecessors. A few passengers, emboldened by the collective experience, quietly approached. An older man with kind eyes stopped by my seat. "I'm sorry for what you went through," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry I didn't say anything." A woman a few rows back simply met my gaze as she walked to the lavatory and gave a small, respectful nod. I accepted their gestures with a quiet nod of my own, acknowledging their solidarity without fanfare. The satisfaction wasn't in a victory lap or in their apologies. It was in the restoration of a fundamental order. My dignity wasn't just returned. It was amplified, polished by the fire of the ordeal, and now recognized by all. By the time we began our descent, the story was already exploding across the digital world. My phone, now connected to the revitalized Wi-Fi, buzzed incessantly with notifications. Lily had texted a link. Videos of Brenda's removal and the crew being fired were already viral. The hashtag Seat2A was trending. The narrative was clear. A powerful man wronged, and justice delivered swiftly and publicly. As the wheels touched down with a gentle squeal, a push notification flashed on my screen from a major news outlet. Sky High Airlines issues public apology after viral discrimination incident. They had issued it before we had even taxied to the gate. A moment later, my phone lit up with a call from a private number I recognized as the airline's CEO. I watched it ring, the screen glowing in the dim cabin. I did not answer. I sent it to voicemail. The time for his apology was past. The satisfaction was complete. The world had borne witness. The guilty had been punished, and my peace had been won not through his words, but through my own unyielding resolve. The journey was over, and justice had been its final destination. The moral of this story is stark and simple. Authority is not a license for bias, and privilege is not a shield from consequences. In a single unjust act, that crew didn't just lose their jobs. They became a living lesson to every institution that quietly tolerates the poison of discrimination. They learned that in today's world, a person's dignity can be the most powerful leverage of all. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many times has a scene like this played out where no one was recording, where the victim didn't have the resources, the platform, or the power to fight back? So I'll ask you directly, what would you have done if you were in that cabin, watching it unfold? Would you have spoken up, or would you have stayed silent? This story ended at 30,000 feet. But my fight against the quiet, systemic bias that fuels these moments is just getting started. My next target is a major corporate partner, a household name whose hiring practices and boardroom diversity are, let's just say, still very much stuck on the ground. But that is a story for another day. If you want to be the first to hear what happens when I take the fight from the friendly skies to the corporate boardroom, make sure to subscribe.